So welcome everybody back to the Dean's Forum. Today we're going to be talking about the fabulous renovation of the Georgia Tech Library. And we're joined today by Dean of the Library, Leslie Sharp. Many of you know Leslie. And we'll also be joined by Stuart Rahm, a principal with Praxis 3 and one of the designers of this. It's more than a renovation, and we'll get into a discussion of that as we go forward. So I'd like to start with Leslie. And Leslie, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the Georgia Tech Library?
Thank you for having me here today. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk about the history of the Georgia Tech Library at Georgia Tech. We have always had a library at Georgia Tech, but it wasn't until 1907 with the building of the Carnegie Library that we had a dedicated building for the Georgia Tech Library. And the Carnegie Building, which still stands today and holds the administrative offices of the president, the provost, and executive vice president for research. In 1907, Andrew Carnegie came to Georgia Tech and he agreed to give $20,000 to support a library at Georgia Tech. He was impressed with the mission of Georgia Tech and really bringing Atlanta and the state and the region into the New South. So the Carnegie Library was the first dedicated building, and it would serve the Georgia Tech campus until 1953. The image you're seeing now is the 1907 Carnegie Library building, and this building was built with $20,000 from the Carnegie Foundation. Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate and philanthropist, gave the money to Georgia Tech to build this first dedicated library building. And the Georgia Tech Library would remain in the Carnegie Building, which now serves as the president and provost and EVPR's offices. They would remain in this building until 1953. Price Gilbert was designed by P.M. Heffernan. P.M. Heffernan is a legendary figure in the School of Architecture and the College of Design, as he was the director of the architecture program for many decades. Mr. Heffernan came to Georgia Tech in 1938. He was originally from Iowa, and he earned a bachelor's degree from Iowa State University and a master's of architecture from Harvard University. He then won the 28th Paris Prize and was able to go over to Europe and study classical design. And he then, after studying in Paris, he came to Georgia Tech. But interestingly enough, it wasn't the classical aesthetic that he brought to Georgia Tech. Instead, what we see with PM is that he brought a modern aesthetic. And we see this in his early Hinman Research Building. We see it with the East Architecture Building from the early 1950s, which was contemporary to Price Gilbert, which is one of his masterpieces. Stuart's going to talk to us about how he brought the building back to light for our newly renovated spaces. Price Gilbert Memorial Library Building would serve Georgia Tech community as the primary library, but it was quickly overgrown. They were having to move journals in and out and in corners. People couldn't find stuff. The seats were all taken. All 800 seats would be taken by our Georgia Tech students, as it was a very popular place to go. And Dorothy Crosland really saw the need for a new library. She was here for 4 decades, and she is really partly responsible for bringing Georgia Tech into the modern age. She brought the patent and trademarks collection here and was one of the earliest 22 repositories in 1946. She helped found the College of Computing. She knew that computers were going to be important. She said, I don't know what they are, but I know that they're going to be important. And in 1966, we see her speaking at the groundbreaking for the Crosland Tower, which would eventually open in 1969. At that same time, we would see the addition of the rotunda onto the Judge S. Price Gilbert Memorial Building. The architects for Crosland Tower were Robert and Company, and Ed Moulthrop, who had previously taught at Georgia Tech and who was an architect, was one of the lead designers on Crosland Tower. Robert and Company is interesting because it was founded by Georgia Tech alumnus L.W. Chip Robert in 1917, and he was the one who founded Robert and Company. And throughout the years, Robert and Company would employ many Georgia Tech engineers as well as architects.
So what were the biggest challenges of converting Crosland Tower, which is more or less a book storage box, into a place that serves people?
Well, Leslie already kind of gave what I thought was her very great. I was talking about bringing buildings back to life. She thought I said bringing buildings back to light. And that's actually kind of the summary of the challenge for Crosland Tower. And I am going to maybe, again, as an architect, I don't like talking as much as I like showing. And so we will show some of this. There we see the brick box for storing books. At the time, it was the way to, in fact, preserve their longevity by keeping them, buffered from ultraviolet light that deteriorates them. But what we did really, a sense, was to open up the box and bring light in. And that was a very big challenge. And you see, I'm going to show some comparison photographs of the history of the building and what we have done in our design efforts. And that was to, in fact, take a building that was a repository and very dark and mostly as an archive to preserve the books and open it up for people and bring light in. And what was a big challenge, I'm going to show later how, in fact, just bringing light in is not just to peel away brick and put lots of glass, but to do it in ways that are very nuanced so that it's about sustainability, environmental considerations for bringing in the right amount of light and sun, solar gain where we need it and views where we need it. And you're getting a preview here of some of the ways we modulated the light, but mostly along Bobby Dodd Way that I just mentioned is the pedestrian and a bit of vehicular spine there in the foreground, was to open it up so that, in fact, the campus could see into the great activity that we hoped would be really alive in the building going forward. And this shows the comparison on the north side where the Architecture Hinman building is and looking up the hill through the grove, as we call it. And you see how, in fact, blockaded in a way the pedestrian spine that went north-south from the historic campus and Tech Tower and administrative buildings to the architecture complex and beyond northward had been for very logical reasons back then when it was designed. While this now seems regrettable, the architects were responding to the security of the books that had to allow everything to connect with only very limited ways in and out of the building. And so it blocked that pedestrian spine, and we'll show you even more so how we opened that up. And that was the great challenge, both through glazing and light and transparency and actual just opening up the physical massing to allow the pedestrian spine to breathe again and entice people to walk by. And lastly, you see in the foreground at the lower level a screen porch. That was an environmental idea that our students, I'm going to show, came up with. To some degree, they really inspired that porch as a three-season room as campuses are starting to realize that a lot of our activities can take place outside in temperate weather. And a reading room as such next to the cafe is, we think now that this is just opened and when warmer weather arrives will be, we think, a very popular spot. And this also shows the opening up of the Crosland Tower from the inside. On the left actually is the same space, but with the low ceiling. We literally peeled open not the facade here, but the floor to allow a very open space for gathering and going up and down from the different levels. a bit like that was pioneered at the Clough Learning Center. That's a very popular place to hang out and see people watch. And then finally for Crosland, opening up the top to the views that, of course, really weren't there as much in the 1970s looking toward Midtown. But as we know now, Midtown is a kind of glory of Atlanta's urbanity that you can now, by opening up those elevations and making some large reading rooms and event spaces for special events, has been a very popular place to get at the pinnacle. It's at the high point of the campus and the highest built part of the campus. The views are really spectacular. Paul Heffernan, of course, realized facing north always was a good exposure to open up, and that was always a kind of glory of glass and views that did not bring any jeopardy to the books because of it was facing north. North light is not the ultraviolet, damage to books. So it was really restoring his great architecture that had been a bit, for environmental reasons, in 1990, during energy considerations, the building was reglazed, but not as sensitively to the original design as one would have hoped. It achieved double glazing and insulated thermal conditions, but it had just approximated the really interesting but nuanced pattern that Paul Heffernan had designed into the original building. And that was our challenge, to still maintain the energy considerations with the glazing, but restore the original artistic vision of Paul Heffernan and maintain all the beauties of the Price Gilbert original building. And open it up from the inside. The entry had never been where the rotunda had to be put for security reasons. The security desk, we were able to open up the floor there and connect the plaza level down to the Grove level, down where the Hinman entry is, and really create all of this, what we call porosity and permeability of the building, to invite people to come in and out at many different points. Now that security is being considered from a different vantage point, how we're not securing the books so much as people using different ways, and we could achieve more sort of welcoming in and out that we did here with that. That was a big move, this opening up of this to this way we thought could still be sensitive to the original historic integrity of the building. And lastly, the reading room that was the glory, two of them, two double height reading rooms stacked on each other that face into that grove where the trees are, and have just always been popular, although you can see in the upper right in 1991, very popular, but very congested at the kind of dawn, if not early days of computer, lab kinds of spaces, where it got very cluttered. And it was our hope to still maintain higher technology opportunities for the students that depend on it and really need it, but to do it in a way that would still maintain the openness and space and views from the great reading rooms that Heffernan had designed.
Stuart, I was really surprised when y'all chose to put glass on the south-facing slope of Crosland Tower. Usually I've thought south-facing, a lot of sun, heat, solar gain. How did you come to that decision, and how did you deal with the exposure of a south-facing slope, south-facing facade?
You're asking because you're right. A south exposure, unlike the north, can be, have great views and openness, but it does face, in fact, a very harsh solar orientation in the south that can really, elevate the energy consumption of a building. So we always had, from the outset, as I mentioned, BNIM has been they helped invent the LEED environmental programs way back when, and we were partly, we think, chosen for that mission, that to bring the building back to life. And in fact, what you see on the left is a diagram that we're hoping, if the books are leaving, we have all that more space for people and our students and our faculty to do all kinds of collaboration in the building, and we would double the population. And in fact, doubling the population, as much as solar heat from the south is a challenge, the body heat of the double population was also a great challenge. But ours was to see if we could actually double the number of people and all of that body heat, but actually reduce as much as possible. In this case, the design proposed by cutting the energy consumption in half. So we were working the energy needs would double, but the energy consumption we brought down in design, and we're hopefully occupancy data will show that we've succeeded in cutting the energy consumption by half. And in doing that, we had to be very wary and challenged by the south exposure. And what you saw was, in fact, a precedent that had been in an early phase by BNIM architects and another campus of working with sunshades in certain ways that can modulate the heat gain and still maintain the views out and actually be environmentally proactive by letting natural light bounce into the space so that daylighting can illuminate the workspaces without needing so much artificial light that uses energy. And so we worked on a particular pattern that was a gradient of louvers they do not move. That would be, although very challenging cost-wise and everything, of some facades actually are dynamic and can possibly move. But we wanted to find the optimum positions of each of the shades. They gradate. They look like an unusual pattern that could, in fact, optimize the light gains for daylighting, reduce the solar gain for keeping the cooling loads down, and put at eye level the views out. And in doing that change, the engineers and the architects, our mechanical and engineers and environmental design engineers, modeled digitally the way that the solar patterns would be from the south and north exposures at different seasons, different times of the day. And we tuned the positioning of each of the louvers on that south facade you saw to do just that, find that sweet spot, that balance between what let as much daylight in to reduce artificial lighting, keep the solar gain out to the degree possible, and optimize the views.
Well, thank you. Can you tell us how you engage Georgia Tech students as part of the design process?
That has been, frankly, my most gratifying, I think, experience in this endeavor. When we were talking about, as a design team, to how our process would be in truly getting a very diverse stakeholder population on the campus to interact and steer the design, then the opportunity of my teaching role seemed to come in. How could we, in fact, engage the students? They are very excited about actually grappling with real-world problems. And this is them at work in early 2014. Students, again, from architecture, industrial design, building construction, and planning all converged and were doing these very, very creative exercises. And they resulted, as you do see now, into panels that were shown to the library staff and faculty, actually to the provost and deans, that really wanted to see what were these really great ideas that they were percolating and that actually did have real outcomes, real influence on the design team's direction of the design. Then I wanted to bring up the most recent workshop, because that has gotten the most recent installation in the library complex. Our students then teamed up with each other to look at the library challenges later in the process. And the digital fabrication lab with Jake Tompkins at the lead and our chair, Scott Marble, and others really helped sponsor a workshop class where they were learning how to use digital fabrication techniques to realize what could happen on the campus, make their campus, make their world beyond. And they were very excited about that. And it came about through looking at the bridge between the two buildings. That was a very unique opportunity. It's a very iconic kind of signifier at the crossroads of the campus to not only open up what was congested before as this blockade, north-south on the Cherry Street pedestrian corridor, but to signify the transformation of the library from a kind of physical print repository to a very future-oriented, digital technology-oriented, which is really symbolic not only of the library's transformation, but of Georgia Tech's really identity as a pioneering campus and institution of learning about the future of technology. It's in our name. And the ideas were about this media, kind of very active, interactive way to introduce information that could be kind of reinvented, how it might interact with architecture in ways that are not just signage. These are, in fact, ways of getting media sort of prismatically refracted into the glass. And the glass has some very interesting qualities. And then we were going to have the component of augmented reality, too, where chroma key replacement, all these very creative ideas. They are yet to come. The infrastructure is in the library for looking at these future media kinds of installations. But the students took on, they prototyped the media within the glass, saw how those reflections could work, and that's how the glass facade on the bridge was tuned to make it all work. And then they looked at that seating environment, like I mentioned, that had come out in the original charrettes, and they worked with very diligent kind of this research into the ways that steel and wood could be fabricated together and form these ways of very flexible seating environments, not just chairs. We didn't want loose chairs because that is, in fact, a fire exit corridor, the bridge. They had to be fixed seating. And this is how, in fact, the design has been conceived with both the seating and the media in a rendering. And we're very happy to show you the next slide because it's only about a week old. It is, in fact, the built installation of the fabrication that has been happening with all of that student creativity and involvement and Jake Tompkins' leadership in the Digital Fabrication Lab. And the seating has just been installed, and we're very excited about how it's turned out.
As an occupant, Leslie, what's your favorite part? Only get to pick one. What's your favorite part of the renovated library?
Well, it's really hard just to pick just one. However, I'm going to have to say that while opening up the north and south facades in Crosland Tower really opened up to the occupants of the building some spectacular views. If you can see behind me, of course it is a cloudy day, but really getting to see parts of campus. I am in being in the library and looking down on Heffernan's Hinman building and looking at East Architecture building and Jerry Cooper's West Architecture building, as well as the rest of Midtown, is fantastic. I would say that that is my favorite piece.
So Leslie, can you describe how the renovation of the physical space has really empowered the library to change the program and take on new missions?
Yes. So, as you know, we have been under a campaign across campus under the leadership of the former provost, Raphael Bross, to create the next in education. The library, and it's really more than renovation, it's reimagining the library, was a key part of creating the next. And we refer to this as Library Next. And it's not just the physical spaces, but also the virtual spaces. And what the reimagining of the library's physical spaces have done is offered us an opportunity to better serve the Georgia Tech community through the physical spaces, but also through our virtual spaces, as well as expansion of our public programming, as well as our support of faculty, staff, and students. We have a new Scholars Event Network. We have exhibit space and Price Gilbert. We're going to have an artist in residence program. We just last week, I got an overview of the final dissertation defense room to serve our graduate students. We have recording studios, audio, as well as video capture space. But all of these physical spaces support our services, but it also underscores the fact that our library is the scholarly heart of the Georgia Tech community.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I think this will be a great story for our students and for our alums, and I think it's important that people really recognize this work and how it's transformed the heart of our campus.